In our ongoing work on the Gospel of Matthew, we find ourselves in this section at Matthew chapter 13, and we are going to be looking at verses 47 to 50. And I'm going to be reading out of the New King James Version as found in this Bible study Bible. Matthew 13, verse 47 says, "And again the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which when it was full, they drew it to shore. They sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but threw the bad away. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth, separate the wicked from among the just, and cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth." Fishing with a dragnet is a very simple and basic way to fish. If you want a good biblical example of this type of fishing, we have one. We can turn to the Gospel of John in chapter 21. This is after Jesus' resurrection, and the disciples are kind of still moping and still in the dumps over what has happened and not really sure as to what the future is. And they do what they have done for some of them all their lives, go fishing. And Jesus is on the shore, and as they're fishing through the night and nothing's going right, there's this one person in the morning that says, "Hey, you know what? Cast your net over there." And under the directions of Jesus, and they soon realize it is Jesus, they throw their net into the water, and lo and behold, they pull up their net, and there's 150 free fish. It is interesting, for the text actually gives us a number of fish caught, which probably is indicative of the fact that you normally don't get this large of a fish count. And so that was why the number was recorded. It was like, whoa. What is also interesting is when you look at this passage through church history, as the number of attempts to give that number 153 some sort of spiritual and theological significance, it probably was no more, no less than the fact that we got a whole lot of fish in one shot. So this type of fishing would result in catches with mixed results. You would take your net ashore and then begin to sort out the fish. Some were edible, some were not. Once the net had returned to shore, needless to say, you can't go, "Oh, you return to the water and live." Fish need to live in their water. So there was a measure of waste in this. It is possible to see this parable as a parable about the church. It is probably better to see this as a parable about final judgment. In fact, if you read Revelation chapter 20 and verses 11 to 15, you have a good image of the final judgment that is consistent with this parable. In verse 13 of Revelation chapter 20, you have the sea give up the dead. It is, as it were, that a giant dragnet is used to bring all the people of the ages to shore. Then, like the fishermen do with that great catch, you begin to sort out what is in your net. The people fishing had a criteria to judge what was an appropriate fish and what was not. And I'm sure they use things like type and size, and there are probably some fish that were sea creatures that simply were not edible at all. The fish that did not fit the criteria were judged and found wanting and cast aside. One thing to note is that Scripture never gives us the criteria by which judgment is meted out. Scripture talks of the judgment of God. Scripture gives us a number of pictures, think of sheep and goat, fish, talents, and so on, that capture a sense of the judgment that is to come. What Scripture never gives us is that definitive checklist that we can use to measure our life by. We can go two ways on this. One way is to say that God is arbitrary and capricious. There are people out there who feel this way about God, and some of those people are in the church. The other way is to see judgment as a personal thing. Judgment is based on what we did with what we had? Were we faithful and true to what God gave us in the place and time that we were in? I do not believe that God is capricious and arbitrary when it comes to judgment. I believe God is true, faithful, and just. He will not judge me by the same standards as the serf that was born in medieval Europe in a part of the world we call now France, by the same standards that he will judge me. Why? Different world, different conditions, different opportunities, so on and so forth. Yes, it comes down to an issue of whether he had faith or she had faith and whether I have faith. Yes, but it's what we do in that time and place with that faith that becomes the measure by which we are judged. Now, I'm not going to be precise here, for I do not believe that is helpful. I think we can see a hint of this in the way that churches of varying types and traditions produce Christians of varying types. My point is that you and I will be held accountable by standards that are fair to us. God will not expect of you that which is impossible. What God will hold us accountable to is what we could do with what the faith gave us in the time and place we were. Take comfort. God is not arbitrary and capricious when it comes to his judgments.